building in the background. Hopefully, it's done soon.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Octant December 9th Octant community meeting. It's kind of a small agenda today. I know there's some things I haven't put on there yet that'll make it grow a little bit, but yeah, I'll get that pulled up. I'll start sharing and we'll get started. So let me just get that pulled up here. Where's it at? Lost in a sea of tabs. As always, there it is. Screen share. All right, everyone can see that okay? Cool. So let's see, today, December 9th. Okay, yeah, so this came up in the channel. Looks like 016, this person was still trying to build 016.1 off of Brew, but Sam pointed out that the upgrade failed with 016.2 as well. And apparently there was still some old Artifactory links in the package lock JSON. I have no excuse for this except for the fact that it's just a systematic failure by the team to properly identify the Artifactory links and remove them. I apologize. This is that's silly. Sam is putting in our build.go file. We're going to just grep for the word Artifactory, and if it's found anywhere, and we're just going to fail. So nothing with Artifactory shall ever be merged in again, assuming all things come from PRs and go through the GitHub checks, which they do. So we will be cutting in 016.3 to fix this very specific issue so that brew installs are functioning again. It'll be no other feature except that. It's literally just to get this Artifactory link out of that source tree. So I apologize to people who are hitting that. Thank you, Sam, for jumping on that and taking care of it. And we'll get that out today? Question mark.
Yeah, I'm just doing some documentation around npm. Where it is that you could do npm ls to check if things resolve beforehand. So something like this could be useful to just check if the environment can resolve any of those npm links. I'm not sure how it works. It's still working locally, even with the VPN off. So if it takes too long, I'm just going to grep for the word Artifactory explicitly. But I think the problem we want to solve here is, can we build Octant if the npm registries don't resolve, and how can we test that?
Yeah, I think in this case, I think just grepping Artifactory and specifically that internal URL for Artifactory, like if that exists, it shouldn't be allowed to merge in, because that'll never be public, and it'll always break if somebody doesn't have the cache sitting there. The problem that I know about the npm ls is that if you have caches, and those could be in various places, whether it's local in there or a global cache, it will attempt to resolve them through that mechanism as well. At least that's my understanding of it. So for people like us who are occasionally on the VPN and occasionally get our references mixed up and washed with this Artifactory stuff, that even that ls check would be insufficient. But I guess it would work in the GitHub workflow. So yeah, either way is fine, as long as whatever makes it not happen again is the thing I want. So that's perfect. And the next one is Sam with the Octant plugin for Kind. I'll stop sharing so that you can pull up anything that you might want to share there.
Yeah, give me a quick second. This should be fairly straightforward. Browser. All right, let me share my screen. And just one. All right. Here is a localhost. All right, so this is running off of Octant 16.2, so nothing from our recent merges to master, simply because there are some new issues around our navigation and pathing, so we won't be showing the new navigation for now. But I think this is just sort of the result of last week's work around a plugin for kind and what that might look like. And this has been shown before. You can do things like create a cluster, add a cluster name, have like a highly available control plane, or just add a number of workers, and it's got some baked-in logic for versioning. And I'm not going to create a cluster, but the key feature here is that you can have feature gate flags enabled upon creation of a cluster, so you don't have to play around with kind configs. But the new update that went into 0.1 was, or 0.0.1, or the pre-alpha release, was that I've added a link here, and this kind of shows your local Docker images and your kind images. I think the first thing you might notice here is that the sort here is still somewhat unstable, and this is resolved in 0.17, but I decided to just leave this in for now simply because I could do the sorting methods by hand by myself to guarantee this order, but it's already fixed. So theoretically, this should, once we upgrade, I can cut a different, I can cut another release on this plugin. But effectively how this works is that you'd have your kind images, and this, the equivalent of checking the images that are located inside of a kind cluster, I think is Docker, I might have had it, yeah, Docker exec. And then I guess it's like CRI, container runtime control, I guess, images. And the reason why you'd have a bunch of images here is because most of the time you can just do Docker pull and it wouldn't be an issue. But in the case where you're building an image locally and you don't want to push it on a registry for some reason, or maybe this is just a purely local workflow, sometimes you might just want to be able to pull the image into the cluster. So in this particular example, we just have the default kind images loaded in here. So you've got some Rancher stuff and things related to control plane. But if I say I wanted to just load a local Nginx image in here, we can just have buttons to do it. And let's see if this works. Load into kind. Yeah, and there it is. There's a little bit of a delay, but we've loaded our Docker Nginx 1.19.2 into the image. And I think Wayne actually put in like a little loading step here that I just kind of omitted. That was weird too. Yeah, there's a loading step that I omitted at some point in time, which I could probably throw back in, so then the alert syncs up a little bit better. But the equivalent of a command here is that you have Docker IO library Nginx, and this is loaded now into that kind control plane. And there is no reason why you can't do this for any other local images. So if you do Docker images, it pretty much applies to anything in this list, and that can be thrown into this kind registry. Other notable things are that we used some Docker libraries to make these more human readable. I think this could have some use cases for our own presentation of sizes within Octant core itself, or we could just re-implement these, but these are kind of nice. We don't do this currently. We just show a really big number. And that's about it. I think it might be cool to actually have these like directly linked to the URL then on Docker Hub if it's docker.io. So there's some room for improvements here, but gonna play around with it, see what you think. This was more of an experiment to get feedback around our plugin API more so than actually, having like a super robust UIs, but I'm happy to devote more time into that plugin if there's interest on it.
Yeah, I had a question. When you create, I'm curious the mechanism that we have for Octant, if it works properly like it should. When you create a new kind cluster using the plugin, does it automatically show up in the list of available contexts?
So yeah, the watcher picks up the new context. And what ends up actually happening is that kind edits the kubeconfig, and then the Octant has its own file watcher, and then it picks up and then it reloads. But the experience that the user gets is that they will actually kind of spinning up those images before, and so it's like trying to put together the kind cluster in the background. So Octant will stay on the old context even as you're creating the new cluster until it actually modifies the kubeconfig, and in which case then Octant will show like Octant is disconnected, reconnecting, and then it switches context automatically. And so that's one of the UX things. That's one of the UX things that's probably we want to address with Octant, is that what happens if a user manually modifies or user tool something modifies the kubeconfig while Octant is running, because it does pick up the changes, but sometimes from a UI perspective, it does things that's not intuitive or even disruptive if the user is viewing something and all of a sudden the context just changes.
Yeah. So if you weren't using this plugin and you were viewing a set of resources, like you're looking at your deployment, and then you in a terminal window, you run, kind create cluster, and while you're looking at that deployment, once that modifies the kubeconfig, it would reload, and you'd no longer be looking at the deployment, and you'd be on the new default context.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think having some mechanism for plugins that are creating clusters, having a mechanism to say like, go ahead and make the switch, right? Like do an explicit like set context call, or something that says like, yeah, I want to make that change, but then like in the generic case, just be like, append it to the list, but don't actually change what I'm looking at, would be a good or a better user experience.
Yeah, and this isn't specific to Kind. Like Kind has a issue that's open that talks about this a little bit, and they're effectively saying this is somewhat the standard with tools that do things to kubeconfig. So that's why it's like even if you don't want Kind to modify the context by default, you kind of have to do some like hacks around it in the background. So I think the best way to address this is just to make Octant deal with this case a little bit better rather than trying to do hacks.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds good. Any other questions for Sam before we move
Yes,
on?
Sam, you mentioned that there are some issues with the navigation URLs with the latest. I have not seen that, and I have quite a few plugins installed. So I'm wondering, do you have more details about that? What's going on?
Yeah, I can. I guess we have time. I can talk about this. I can actually go to the code and show you explicitly what's happening. So if you go into, and maybe other people on the call might not necessarily be interested in this. So
We can do it offline too. If you
No,
want.
this is what this call's here for. This is great.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Yeah, should be cluster view. Okay, so if you look at I know like showing.
You're not sharing, by the way.
Yeah, I'll give it a second. Okay, so here's the code for plugin. Here's the plugin code. And really, when we generate this new link, what ends up happening is that we take this thing called name here, and this name, and actually this is also kind of interesting. This name here is just the cluster name, right? So like if it's, in this case, in the client cluster, we call it kind. We can call it any number of things, right? Kind test, whatever. But what ends up happening is that if we want to go to this link, you kind of see it go. We want the path to be kind, then kind, right? Like this is the kind plugin module, and then this is the name of this cluster is kind, right? And so what ends up happening is that when I create this particular view in a plugin, I don't need to know that I'm in the module kind. And what's happening now is that on master, now this new link has to have knowledge of this first initial module before we're actually creating the link. So if I were to do this new link on 17, it would actually just route me to /kind, and that's going to break the existing plugins, notably the Helm plugin, which is to say that we can't do that, but we would, something broke in the meantime, and either we'd have to expose a method that lets people know how to get the module up front, or just be very clear that this is happening.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah, that definitely shouldn't happen. That's sounds like a breaking change. Might be related to navigation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that behavior shouldn't change.
Right.
So I agree with Milan. Like that, this is a unintended side effect of something that we want to make sure it's a regression, it's a bug, and we should fix it.
Yeah, I'll look into that, since most likely I broke it with the navigation changes.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just we need to just have better, and I know we keep saying this, but we want to have better testing in place for a lot of our plugin APIs. Like
Right.
like currently right now, like we're building component.newlink in the context of Octant core. And what we really want is testing from the context of a plugin.
Yeah. That actually leads me to another thing that I can talk about around plugin testing. I was thinking about this idea, and it's literally just an idea in my head. But I was walking yesterday, and I was like, we have this JavaScript runtime for the Go runtime. I haven't quite figured it out yet. I don't know how we would do it, but we have this JavaScript runtime, and that is, if you look at how the code is structured, right? It like instantiates this in-memory JavaScript runtime. It loads the JavaScript code in, and then it executes Go like code that's mostly in our package folder, like public Go code. We could very likely create a command that was like JavaScript plugin test executable or something like that took in the plugin as like the post compiled plugin as a input, and then a set of JavaScript tests. So we could basically make a test harness for the JavaScript plugins that would use the actual runtime that we're using, right? Like, so you would do something like go run build.go, and then you would do like, build JS test runner, right? And then the or plugin test runner, and then you'd have that binary, and that binary would take two things in: the plugin and the test you want to run. And then if we had something like that, we could probably pretty easily make like helpers or UI extent like code extensions for VS Code or something like that, to like, oh, the test runner is there. And like it would just automatically take your JS, your underscore plugin underscore test JS file, which would be there in your plugin project, right? That we scaffold out with Yeoman, and have a test runner for at least for JavaScript plugins. The Go plugins are a little trickier because it's not just built up in memory and executed against the code. There's an actual gRPC element to it, but there's probably in-memory gRPC servers where you can like satisfy the endpoint and do all sorts of testing. So anyway, I think it's something we definitely need, especially for what we're going to be considering. Like, hey, this is plugin API 1.0. We have to be able to get these plugins under test and leverage it. So that's something that I've been thinking about. Right. That's all I got. Just an idea.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I almost feel that part of the releasing 1.0 should be one of the things we need to do before that is to build a test harness around plugin API. Without that, we're going to run into trouble sooner or later. So
Yeah. I think we have a discussion happening right now. This is kind of a tie-in to that on our GitHub discussions around converting the built-in modules that ship with Octant into plugins and having them use the plugin interfaces to perform their work. So using that as like a forcing function to stabilize our plugin APIs, but also then we would also have to create some mechanism to be able to get those under test, because we can't ship them without we can't just delete all the tests we have around it and be like, oh, they're plugins, they don't get tests. Like we have to come up with some mechanism to properly test them. So I think going forward, that's going to be the kind of the key thing that helps us drive a lot of the changes and improvements for the plugin API is converting those modules, which will happen after Electron.
Oh, speaking of Electron, I don't know. Oh, do we have more? Do we have anything more to say about testing? I don't want to derail.
I don't think
topic.
so. Yep.
Yeah. So Electron, I'm quick update on that. So I'm using the GitHub Actions for the Electron builder, and pretty much the pattern that I'm going with is that the builder is going to embed a binary, and I think I'm having some weird pathing issues. And really, Electron is super slow to build on my workstation and in CI for that matter. But I think it's going to be kind of interesting to ship at the moment, or even the builder at the moment, simply because we have to build the binary for each particular operating system, then build Electron with the binary embedded. So it's going to be like a build. It's going to be like a build matrix that kind of, we built the binary first, and then we then build out Electron. And for the first pass, I'm just going to have it just rebuild the binary on the fly, and then just do it. But I'm thinking for future releases, and I have to figure out if this is possible or not. But we would have an Electron builder CI process that kicks off after a particular release, or even just after a particular release. And what ends up happening is that it'll pull the released binary into the Electron builder process. So then we're not double building a binary, or hypothetically just rebuilding something that already exists or might be slightly different into the Electron build, which kind of leads to an interesting case with pull requests too, because we kind of have one pipeline where we want to have the binary built on the fly and another pipeline that we don't. So it's something that I'm thinking about long term, but at the moment, I'm just going to stick to the first one, just everything in a single pipeline, so then we don't have to think about complexity yet. And that's coming soonish. I think it's just slow because I can't iterate quickly on it. I think I'm just heading into either pathing issues or just bad config somewhere. So I'm slowly chugging through it.
Yep, that sounds good. I'm also working on it. And Sam and I had synced before I was out on vacation, and a lot of the team was out 2 weeks ago. We had just started to sync on getting some local builds of Electron and comparing it to our existing Electron build system, and then using that to kind of identify, okay, what are the entry points here, and how do we want to build this thing, and how are these pieces going to fit together? Because currently there's this stream rendering piece that runs, and then there's this front end piece that or stream generating piece that runs, and then there's a front end piece which is the stream rendering element, right? And so getting that stream generator and the stream renderer coexisting in a single binary and both running and communicating to each other. There's various ways to do it, which is we now have access to things like the internal IPC mechanisms within Electron, or we can still just use our straight HTTP mechanism, which is what we're going to do for now, is just use the HTTP. But yeah, so getting a new shell around how we're building out Electron and getting it up to date and modernized with the current best conventions, at least the ones that we can find. And then once that build is happening, just kind of want to outline some of the steps in this process. Once that Electron build is happening, it'll start being put up into nightlies. The team will be running that as our primary way to develop on Octant, and then we'll probably do kind of like we call it I don't know what it's called. We'll call it a sprint. We'll do a focused sprint on usability and interacting with Octant via Electron, right? So you'll probably see a whole new host of issues that get opened around the back buttons, like we need to add back and forward buttons or some mechanism to support that if we find that they're lacking. Maybe modifications need to be made to like the breadcrumbs. I don't think so, but like, things like that, navigational things, viewing resources. How do you, what kind of mechanism are we going to have in place for, like, I want to reference this resource, like I want to go to deployments, but then I switch contexts and I want to go to the same like path, right? Like right now you can do manual path editing, right? You could just say like, I have a long custom resource name, which I know exists across multiple namespaces. So I'll paste it in after I switch the context or something. But this, I don't know, nuanced things like that, just usability things is really what I'm getting at. That we'll go through and kind of identify and figure out and make sure that we're all those get addressed before we ship out. Yeah, I think that covers kind of our current approach to Electron.
Also, probably a lot of things that we can gain from Electron, like status bar on
keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah,
right. Like we don't have to.
Hopefully, proper keyboard shortcuts, because browser is making those really hard. So
yeah, we get. I'm really excited. We get to control them now. We're just like, this is what it does. We said so.
Yeah. It's going to be exciting stage, I think, once we have Electron build working.
Yeah, notifications, things like that. Like, it's exciting. So, cool. Yeah, that's all I have to add there. Let's go back to the agenda, see if there's anything that was missed here. Last item, let's see. No, that's it. We talked about everything. Pia, did you have anything that you wanted to add or talk about?
Not yet. I have the meeting set up with all of you, and once we start finalizing things, would love to share here.
Great. Okay. Which meeting is that?
We have the OKR meeting tomorrow, and today we have a meeting just to talk more about Octant. Would love to learn more about the plugin stuff.
Cool. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So expect some share out about kind of the higher level objectives for Octant and like alignment with our roadmap and what we're going to be focusing on as we move forward. We'll be working with Pia to kind of determine some of that stuff over the course of this week, and hopefully get that shared out next week or the week after.
Yes.
Hey, since we have some time, maybe I can quickly show I've been working on how to show the breadcrumbs with a lot of items. Maybe I can show that quickly and get some feedback.
Yeah, sure. Just a quick side note.
Sure.
What plugin meeting, or is that just not relevant to me?
I think I think what I was saying about converting our internal modules to plugins.
I think Sam meant when I said I'd like to learn about plugins. That's just with me and Wayne.
Okay, cool. Okay, just making sure an invite didn't get lost somewhere.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right, so yeah, we've been talking about breadcrumbs quite a bit, and that is pretty much done now. It's in a review process. I put the PR out yesterday. But one thing that didn't get addressed there that I've been working on since is, you probably remember at some point we were wondering what we're going to do. So first of all, the breadcrumbs now contain the drop downs when they make sense. And also I did a little bit of work. So to limit the number of items we show here. So in this case, currently I set it to 10. If there is more than 10 items, I will display this, and then that will open another extra items. And so you can go back and forth, which limits number of items we show. In this case, it's not that bad, but in some cases, I think I have one of my tests is, so it can be more than 100, and there's definitely not the upper limit of number of items. So something like this, just to quickly display, wasn't so easy to do with clarity, but I ended up just limiting number of items we show initially, and then you can expand that. So in this case, you can expand that if in case you need them. I'm sorry, my system is pretty slow with Zoom going on, so it takes a while just to render. It's coming. Yeah, so in this case, I think it's 120 items. So we initially show only 10, and if you want to access the rest of them, you can still scroll down and see all 120, and also reduce it back to the original. So I think this is going to work pretty well for both performance and usability point of view. But if you have any feedback, that PR is up for review. This is a good time to address any other breadcrumb issues. So. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I like it. I do worry. So I was using the PR today, and the one thing that I'm still a little worried about is just like how useful, like in the case where you do have 121 things, right? Like the effort to like expand and go all the way down to the bottom to find the 119th one that you want to click on seems, I don't know. And like I was noticing this with pods too, like on a large cluster with a lot of pods, where you have hundreds and thousands of, like sometimes thousands of pods, you expand it and the list is like, it's not a useful list. It doesn't really help me. So I'm wondering, I'm almost wondering if we want to like try the sibling approach and just like use it and see how that feels, because having now used the children approach, it's really great when there's only a few, but it quickly becomes like I don't know.
Well, switching to sibling approach would not address this. This will just move from here to, so this drop down will virtually move from here to the right. It's basically off by one if you're thinking in a sibling approach, but there is still the same amount of information. So what this does is just make sure that how often you have that many items and how often you just want to access it through the drop down. And even if you do, maybe there are different ways to do that. Maybe, you can go back to the custom resource definitions and do filter and search there. So unfortunately, I think the only better solution for this would be paging, but paging with dropdowns, that's kind of not a good UX pattern. Maybe search, and maybe at the top of that dropdown first line can be a search bar where you can type in few characters and then.
Yeah, I think our quick switcher works with custom resource definitions, doesn't it?
You can try it.
If I remember, the quick switchers control and. So how would I search for the pods?
namespaces is I remember we added that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, so like this interface to me is more like I'm wondering, so we have this like generic quick switcher, but like what if we could get that similar behavior, maybe not in a drop down, but in a like you were saying, like some mechanism on the page where you are able to just filter the result. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that honestly, I don't think that belongs to breadcrumbs. I'm absolutely with you. We need to do some filtering, searching, and we have this filter here that I think this should be like not on. This should be general like search filter control. And I talked to Scott at some point about that, revamping that, and I know they're doing some things on transmission control as well. So just to search and find things, this is probably the best place to do it. But drop downs are just used for navigation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think it should be there.
Right, and they're secondary navigation item too. So I think what this approach does right now is just limits amount of data we are loading initially to improve the performance, and still allows you ability to access everything else, although that might be pretty tricky. Sometimes it still should work. So I think for now we are good, but I would definitely like to add the search at some point. But then again, for navigation element, is this really a good place for that? Cool. Yeah. That's all I got.
All right. Anything else before we call it? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I'll see you next week.
See you.
Thank you.